Good morning, good morning, good morning. How the devil art thou? Hopefully you're keeping well. I mean that. So, the other day, I did one of these walking, talking videos, and I talked about individual acts, because regardless of whether you're using a 3-act structure, a 2-act structure, 1 act, 4 act, 5 act, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, however many fucking acts you have in your overall story, each act is a smaller story within the bigger story. And it's defined a certain way, as I mentioned in that video. If you haven't seen that video, please check it out. I really wouldn't mind. And I told you how we define an act, and that we define it because where an act is a smaller story within the bigger story, it has its own 3-act structure. Well, this brings up 2, maybe 3 questions that I think are absolutely valid and really should be addressed before someone goes, right, I'm going to put that in the comment section. And that's this. First of all, if an individual act of a story is a smaller story within the bigger story, does that mean that an individual scene is a smaller story within the smaller story that's within the bigger story? Bluntly, yes. I mean, there is an issue of semantics here. Are we talking about scene, sequel, or sequence? Now, that's another topic for a different video somewhere down the line. Probably not the easiest one to discuss, but I'm going to give it a go at some point, just not today. But when you take the semantics out of it, the answer is yes. An individual scene is a smaller scene. An individual scene is a smaller story within the smaller story that's within the bigger story. On that video, Marshall Lee, my main man Marshall Lee, left a comment that said wheels within wheels, and this is absolutely spot on. It's a very accurate way of describing this. It's a part of something that's known as fractal theory. Once again, great topic of conversation. Not exactly the easiest topic of conversation to have, and it's definitely not one that I'm starting in this video. I will save it for a different video. So to answer the first question, yes, every smaller part of your story is a story within the story. So an act is a smaller story within the big story, the entire story. And a scene is a smaller story within the smaller story that's within the bigger story. Okay, so the second question then arises. If an individual act of a story is a smaller story within the bigger story, and that story has its own 3-act structure, does that mean that because a scene is a smaller story within the smaller story within the bigger story, does that mean that a scene also has its own 3-act structure? Once again, the answer is yes. Abso-fucking-lutely it does. And then we come to our third question that has arisen from this topic of conversation. Your bigger story has as many acts as you want it to have, but most commonly, the most common act structure that people work within, especially when they're beginning to write stories, regardless of whether it's for comics, television, video games, whatever, is a 3-act structure. An individual act of a story has its own 3-act structure. And we now know that an individual scene has its own 3-act structure because it's a small story within a smaller story within a bigger story. But does that mean that the 3-act structure of your scene is the same as the 3-act structure of your individual act? Now, what I mean by that is this. An individual act is defined by Act 1, a question is presented. Act 2, that question is answered. Act 3, the lead now has a new goal and sets about that new goal. Does that mean that it's the same for a scene? No, it's actually different, because when we use the 3-act structure for the entire story, one of the reasons why it's the most commonly used act structure, one of the most popular act structures, and the one that we tend to learn storytelling with, is because Act 1 stands for beginning, Act 2 stands for middle, and Act 3 stands for end. Or, as I much prefer it, Act 1 pity, Act 2, fear, Act 3, catharsis. Look, at the end of the day, you're not 3 years old. You know what order beginning, middle and end go in. You don't need the 3-act structure to help you with that. So, pity, fear, catharsis. Besides, if you stick to beginning, middle and end, there is more chance that you will stray away from non-linear storytelling. And non-linear storytelling can be really fun. Difficult, but fun. So anyway, I'm going to go back over here so that I don't look so bleached out on the screen for you. So with a scene, it's different. Act 1 is hook. Act 2 is intensity. Act 3 is prompt. Or, if you're having trouble with that, just remember the word hip. So, what do we mean by hook, intensity and prompt? Well, the first act of your scene is like a smaller version of the hook for your entire story. Like that hook at the beginning of your story that makes the reader go, okay, I want to read this book, I want to buy this book, I want to get into this story, is, it's got to be something special. A hook for a scene can be a similar thing, but on a much smaller scale. Let me give you an example. Let's say that you are one of the lucky few out there who is writing a Batman comic. No, not a bootleg thing, not without DC knowing. I mean, DC has come to you and they said, you fucking rock as a writer, we need you to write a Batman comic. And you go, all right. So you're writing a Batman comic and you got this scene where Bruce Wayne is hungry. Okay, and he really wants a sandwich. Alfred's not there because Alfred's on holiday, so he's gone to Las Vegas. He's going to do a bit of gambling, and when he thinks no one's looking, he's going to have a look at that hooker in the corner, and he's going to think about what it would be like to spend the night with her, but he's not actually going to do anything about it. Anyway, that's probably a minor detail that you don't need in your story, but doesn't matter. So Bruce Wayne is alone at Wayne Manor, and he's hungry and he really likes sandwiches, so he wants a sandwich. And fucking hell, he's Bruce Wayne, he's Batman for fuck's sake. He is going to make a sandwich. But he has to do it himself. Normally he would get Alfred to do it, but like we said, Alfred's not there, so he goes in to his kitchen and makes the sandwich successfully, and then sits down in front of the television and watches a reality show and hates himself for it because he's that person that's always at the bar that's going, oh, reality TV, doesn't it suck? Oh God, it's awful, it's destroying television. But because no one else can see him, he's gonna enjoy it the best that he can. Once again, these are probably details that you don't need, but doesn't it just make for a boring scene in a story? Because what's happening, just everyday stuff. If you want to vicariously live through the eyes of someone else successfully making a sandwich, then you can find a friend and just watch them make a sandwich. You don't need to pick up a Batman comic. So there needs to be some sort of hook at the beginning of that scene. Maybe that hook could be Bruce Wayne, because Alfred isn't there, because we know what he's doing in Las Vegas. Bruce Wayne goes into his kitchen to make a sandwich because he's hungry, goddammit, and the Batman should never be hungry. And he goes into his kitchen and discovers that the cat is on fire. I don't know, it could be something like that, but there's your hook. Or maybe the hook could be something as simple as he goes into the kitchen to make his sandwich and there's no bread, there's no bagels, there's no alternatives or substitutes, there is nothing to make a sandwich with. Which means he has to go out into Gotham City and get hold of some bread from the nearest store. Now, like I said, that's not really exciting, but it's much better than if he successfully makes a sandwich. Although, I gotta admit, I do prefer the idea of him walking into the kitchen and the cat's on fire, and then he could be like, I didn't have a fucking cat. So, one, what's this cat doing here, and why is it on fire? Act 2 of your scene is intensity. But can you tell that I'm making up this example off the top of my head, by the way? Act 2 is intensity. You don't want, if there's a problem presented in the hook of the scene, you don't necessarily want it to be resolved that easily, or if it is resolved that easily, there should be something else that gets in the way. So what do I mean by this? With the idea of Bruce Wayne making a sandwich, and if he makes the sandwich successfully, maybe there's then an explosion outside and he drops the sandwich. So he successfully made the sandwich, but he can't enjoy it because something else has happened. Or in the example where there's no bread and he's got to go outside, he realises like, oh, I'm gonna have to drive myself there because my chauffeur, Alfred, is on holiday. How dare he? In Las Vegas. We all know what he's doing in Las Vegas. So I'm gonna have to drive myself there. Oh no! There's no gas in the car. There's no gas in the car. He's gonna have to use his appendages and walk into Gotham City like common folk. The Batman isn't common folk. Bruce Wayne's not common folk. Or he's going to walk into the city like a comic book writer trying to do a video. Scratch that one from the record. So anyway, intensity. That's the second act of your scene. And then the third act of your scene is prompt, which is basically a mini cliffhanger. It's kind of like a reverse hook. It's something to keep the reader continually reading. So like I said, maybe Bruce Wayne makes his sandwich successfully, but then there's an explosion outside and he drops his sandwich. He's like, what the hell's that? And he goes towards the explosion and maybe the Joker's there. Or in the other version of this example, he's trying to make a sandwich. He doesn't have the ingredients. So he goes to drive himself into Gotham City. He can't because there's no gas in the car. He has to walk like common folk or a comic book writer with his DSLR camera out in public making a video for YouTube. So he walks to the end of his drive, gets to the gate and discovers that there's a dead body there. And like, I don't know who the body is. Maybe it looks like Alfred and that's what makes him concerned, but it's not actually Alfred. It's Alfred's evil twin, Jebediah. You get the rough idea. Hook, intensity, prompt. I wish I could have thought of a better example. Maybe I should have thought about that before I actually did this video. Far from the point. So, to answer the questions that were presented in this video, is a scene a smaller story within a smaller story within the bigger story? Yes. Does it have its own 3-act structure? Yes. How is it defined? Hook, intensity, and prompt. I hope this helps you guys out and I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I'm going to wrap it up because I think my battery's about to die. So, until next time guys, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and most importantly, stay awesome.